Everyone. So this is the final part of the semester, and this is actually my favorite part of the semester because we get to discuss what I think is the culmination of reading and writing, and this is called rhetoric. And rhetoric is everywhere. It is the combination of reading and writing, and we're going to be looking at different aspects of it, applying the strategies that we've talked about in class previously. And also, we're going to be looking at more authentic examples of media, of culture, of music, of news. Everything that we encounter can have a form of rhetoric. And so, if you've never heard this word before, just say it: rhetoric. One more time: rhetoric. Remember that we talked about how if you come across a word that you don't know or not familiar with, you can find synonyms for it. So if you've never heard of the word rhetoric, here is a list of synonyms to explain what it is. Rhetoric is language. It can be also defined as style, vocabulary, expression, words, and speech. So from now on, when you hear the word rhetoric, it can mean any of these things. So, just to give you some backdrop, you probably have heard rhetoric somewhere in the news or in conversation. Here's an example in one sentence. If someone does not stop the political rhetoric in that country, a civil war is likely to break out soon. Sentence 2. The general hoped his rhetoric would stir his soldiers into action. Sentence 3. As the activist has gotten older, he has changed the tone of his rhetoric to a more peaceful voice. And sentence 4. Everyone knew the defendant's statement was simply rhetoric, meant to trick the judge into giving him a light sentence. So we see the word rhetoric here used in 4 different ways. And if you reflect back on those synonyms that I just talked about, now I hope this gives you clarity. So that political language in that country may cause a war to break out soon. Looking at sentence 2, the expression or the vocabulary could stir the soldiers into action. Sentence 3, the tone of his words, the tone of his writing, the tone of his language or expression. So remember, rhetoric just means words, language, expression, style, vocabulary. So where is rhetoric found? This is a very old concept connected to philosophy and English. And Aristotle is the Greek philosopher who is known for creating rhetoric as we know it many centuries ago. And so when you hear the word rhetoric, now we know what it means: a language, style, expression, or writing. And so rhetoric has to do with 3 different things. The first point is a messenger, the creator, the speaker, the writer. The next facet of rhetoric would be the reader or the listener. In other words, the audience, the viewer. For whom is this material created? We talked in the beginning of the semester and how when material is created, it has to be designed for a specific audience. And finally, point 3, the message, the actual speech or the text. What is the author trying to convey? What is the messenger trying to tell the audience? And so these are the 3 foundational parts of rhetoric. So just to give you some more background, a specific definition of what rhetoric is, it is a study of how a speaker or writer uses words to influence an audience. If you think back to those examples that we just looked at using rhetoric, the political rhetoric may cause a civil war. The general's rhetoric may stir the soldiers into action. So rhetoric is designed to influence. And have we heard anything like that in the past? Influence, motivate, stir. Does persuasion come to mind? So when you think about rhetoric, it is actually persuasion. And so our goal as readers is to examine and explore how persuasive a text is. And remember, a text could be a book, an article, a speech, a performance. And so point B says that language is the most common form of rhetoric. So again, when you hear rhetoric, we most often think of language, writing, vocabulary. But I want you to know that rhetoric comes in other forms: clothing, music, and art. Specifically with music. Okay, I'm going to go back for a little bit. Do you remember the song What's Going On, written by Marvin Gaye? Well, if you think about that specific song, it was written in the 70s. And the message of that song was to encourage peace, to protect the environment, to stop war, for the country to be unified. That was the message, the rhetorical message of that song. It was written for that specific time. Had that song been written and produced in the 90s, it may not have had the rhetorical effect that it needed as it did in the 70s. So a lot of things that we experience in the world are created through rhetoric. And our goal as readers is to just see and figure out how persuasive that rhetoric is. Point C says that rhetoric is the foundation of critical thinking. So again, we're going back to that analysis, reading something multiple times, asking questions of the author, looking at the facts, looking at the opinions. We're looking for bias, statistics, proof. And in doing that, we are working to understand and judge arguments. Remember, as readers, we are judging to see how effective, how persuasive a text is. Who is the rhetorician? This is point D. Rhetorician. Let's say that word, rhetorician. The rhetorician is the author of the speech, the writer, the creator. So remember that rhetoric comes in many forms. It can be an advertisement, a cartoon, another piece of work. The rhetorician is the person who creates that, otherwise known as the speaker or the writer. So remember that when you know something about the writer, when you understand who he or she is, it can give you greater insight into his or her work and his or her rhetorical purpose. So how are we doing so far? Does this make sense to you? I wish we were in class so we could discuss it. We're going to talk about it then when we get back together. But do you understand what rhetoric is? I love for you to be able to explain this back to me in class on Monday. So just take a couple of minutes in your notes just to jot down what you think rhetoric is or how you interpret what we've talked about so far. Okay, so a little more about rhetoric. Where is it found? So you can find rhetoric in any of these concepts, in essays, articles, and reports, certainly in documents that are written. But you can also find it in posters, bumper stickers, television movies, and movies. So let's think about the 1950s. Okay, most of the television shows were in black and white. Some families in America had televisions, some didn't. When you think about that era, it was very family oriented. Men worked while women stayed at home and cared for the children. Entertainment television shows that were on television were heavily domesticated, which meant that women stay at home and tend to the family. Is that wrong? No. But that was the rhetorical theme, the rhetorical message of television at that time. Also on shows such as that, you saw families in which a couple, heterosexual, were married and had at least 2 children and probably a pet. In terms of race, there wasn't much diversity. It was mainly Caucasian families that you saw on television. That was the rhetorical message of the day. That was the rhetorical message of our country at that time in America. Now, think about today. when you look at television, the rhetorical message is quite different. You have television shows with families from different races and ethnicities, single parents on television, parents, grandparents raising children. You see more comedy shows. The relationship status is different. You see couples who are living together and not married. You see couples who may be in homosexual or lesbian relationships. Much different from the 1950s. We have a new rhetorical message in the country. You also see rhetoric in vehicles, industrial design. So some buildings that we encounter are created rhetorically. They have a message. Even clothing can have a rhetorical message. What message are we sending with our clothing? There is such a study called communicative clothing. So for example, you may yourself or have friends who wear t-shirts that have messages on them, creative t-shirts. There's something called symbolic communication. So what symbols are we using to communicate? How would I communicate to you? What message would I be sending you if I came to class in jogging pants and a hair wrap and flip-flops? I'm coming to teach. What message would I be sending you? When you go to an interview and wear your business attire, what message are you sending? So again, even clothing can be rhetorical. Again, this is called communicative clothing. So here we are again. We have looked at this diagram from the beginning of class, and now we're coming back full circle. As you look at this diagram, the only thing that's different is the center bubble. When you go back to the series 1 notes, it used to say rhetoric. It used to say reading and writing. Now here it says rhetoric. So rhetoric is the combination of reading and writing. And notice that a lot of these concepts are still the same. So we've actually been doing rhetorical analysis, preparing that, laying the foundation for now. So, where can we find rhetoric? When you think about the industry of social media in terms of Twitter and YouTube, MySpace, that's a little bit dated. So we're in this culture of everybody has an opinion. So I can chime in and write my thoughts on what's happening in the world. You can post something, I can post something, we can talk about it. We have our right to freedom of speech. That's one of the rhetorical themes that we have in our country right now in our world. Also, in terms of privacy and information, there are no secrets. Everybody has a camera. There are cameras in our phones, surveillance cameras. The police have cameras. So nothing is secretive. Everything is recorded. We're always in action. Another rhetorical theme that I have noticed in our country is with reality television. So drama is on a whole nother level today. So we follow people around in what's supposed to be their daily life, daily routine, and we observe them, watch them for drama. We get involved into their personal affairs. We chime in on, their problems. We chime in on their victories. We chime in on what we think that they should and should not be doing, and we post it on our social media. This is the world that we live in today. Just taking a look at this red logo here at the lower left-hand screen where it says ESPN, that represents our sports industry. So sports today is not just a men and women playing with the ball for fun. The sports industry is billion-dollar industry in where the athletes are not just athletes, they're celebrities, they're businessmen and women. They are the face of many products that we purchase. They're leaders, they're mentors, role models. Unfortunately, some of them get caught up in the drama. So the sports industry is completely different than what it was, maybe 25, 30, 50 years ago. And finally, we have this picture right here with Lady Liberty smoking a blunt. It's certainly gets our attention. So this represents the era that we live in, that marijuana is no longer a recreational drug. It can be also used medically. There's an argument in that. I should be able to use the drug of choice, drug of my choice, to fulfill my medical needs. And I'm just paraphrasing on what the message is. So all of these symbols here, these 5 symbols, they represent the rhetorical messages of our country today. So I want to hone in on a few concepts. One thing that I want you to be aware of is the rhetorical situation. It is the circumstances in which you communicate. So what's happening in the world that causes me to write? The rhetorical situation exists every time that you, as a writer, create something. So, for example, a couple of months ago, there was a horrible massacre in Nigeria, I believe at a college, where a group of young Christian college students were killed by a Muslim group. The group came in very early in the morning. Many people were shot and beheaded. And so because of that event, speeches were created. New policies would be put in place. So when things happen in the world, that causes people to write. There were news articles about it, interviews, television shows. So if nothing happens in the world, there's no need to create something. And looking at this third bullet, it says, as a writer in which you are, you adapt your writing depending on your purpose and your audience. So as a writer, what is your purpose for communicating? Is it persuasive, entertaining, informative? It is a blend. That depends on your purpose. And then your audience. For whom are you writing? For your peers? For me, your teacher? For your supervisor? So just think about that the next time you prepare to write something or present something. What is the rhetorical situation? Okay. Just a few more notes here on rhetorical situation. So it's the setting, another way that we can define this, it's a setting that generates the need for writing. So why do I need to write something? Why do I need to create something? What's the setting that generates this, that causes it, that prompts it? The rhetorical situation is affected by four things, the time period or timing. So what's happening in the world? Is it the 21st century as of today? Is it 50 years ago? 100 years ago? We're going to look at some speeches from Dr. Martin Luther King later this semester. And so when we begin to explore the context of his speeches, it will reflect the time period in which he was writing. Location. So where specifically are you at in the world in which you need to write? In some cultures, women are not allowed to be educated. In other cultures, they are. What's the rhetorical situation? Current events. So if there's a medical crisis, we hear many talks of wars and social unrest. Those events cause people to write and discuss. The last point is cultural significance. So in this age of technology in which we live, in this age of significance, people are always writing, posting, blogging, tweeting, chiming in. That's the rhetorical situation in which we live. Another example about rhetorical situation. So when you write a cover letter for the next job in which you may be interviewing, that's a rhetorical situation. That cover letter will highlight your qualifications, your experience, your rationale for why you should have the position. The interview in which you'll be going on, that is the rhetorical situation which will cause you to write that cover letter. Okay, so a little bit about rhetorical purpose. It is understanding what is going on in the world at the time the text was created and exploring how those events affect the text. So, another example. So remember, if you've ever read or listened to Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, for you to fully understand that speech, you would have to understand what was going on in the world at that time. It was in the center of the American Civil Rights Movement, where Black Americans and Hispanic Americans and other non-Caucasian Americans were seeking equality. Many semesters ago, or many months ago, there was social unrest regarding Russia and Ukraine and the issue with the oil industry. So at that time, President Obama had presented many speeches regarding that. So based on that rhetorical situation, speeches were written. And when we get back together in class on Monday, I'm going to show you these quick videos of speeches. And so you can find rhetorical purpose and concepts quite a bit in speeches. And whenever you do an analysis or an exploration like this, just think about the speaker, the audience, the purpose, and the context. So just to recap on the rhetorician. So again, the rhetorician is the writer or the speaker, the person creating this piece. And when you understand who he or she is, it will give you greater insight into his or her work. And so there are a lot of things that affect us as writers. And this is a list of personal characteristics that I'd like for you to consider. Your life experiences, your age, your parents and friends, your gender, your race, your education, geography, and where you were raised and where you currently live, socioeconomic status, your political orientation. Are you Republican? Are you in the Green Party? Are you Democrat? Perhaps you have biases, personal biases. All of these things affect the way that you write. Another facet to consider would be the audience. So the audience are the readers, the listeners, the viewers. And a lot of the factors that I just discussed regarding the speaker or the rhetorician are also the same for the audience. So again, when you look at your audience, who are they? What is the most common or average age of your audience? What's their social class? Their education? What are their past experiences? Their culture? What expectations do the audience have of you? You should think about that as you prepare to present or to write something. Two facets of the audience that I want you to consider are the intended audience, and the unintended audience. And so I want to talk about the intended audience first. So many semesters ago in Connecticut, a young man entered a school, mentally ill young man entered a school and killed 26 people, which were mainly young children and teachers. It was a Sandy Hook event. And the young man took his own life after that, as well as taking his mother's. And so as soon as that event was released to the public, President Obama presented a speech. And the intended audience were the parents of those children and the family members. When he presented that speech, he wasn't talking to the media. He wasn't talking to leaders in the gun industry. He was talking to the family. They were the intended audience. The media, those of us who watched the reporting, people who were leaders in the gun industry, they would have been the unintended audience. Another example, Donald Sterling. He is an older gentleman. I believe he is the owner of the Clippers basketball team. And although he's married, some summers back, he was dating a much younger woman. And he and his girlfriend got into a heated conversation. I believe she was socializing with other men and he was upset about that. And he said some very offensive things to her regarding race. But what he did not know is that she taped that conversation and she released it to the media. So in this example, Donald Spears, his girlfriend, was the intended audience. He didn't intend for everybody else to hear that conversation. So we, the listeners, the media, sports industry, they were the unintended audience. So whenever you're writing or creating something, you want to always gear it toward your intended audience. Who are the people that you're trying to persuade, inform? Who is that group that you're trying to convey material to? One thing that I want you to consider is that as time passes, the message can change as the audience changes. So there is a ongoing conversation about cell phones and education. And so had you talked to a teacher 20 years ago about having cell phones in the classroom, he or she may have just been totally against it. Cell phones are a distraction, nobody needs them, they have no place in the classroom. Well, that conversation has changed since then. For example, our cell phones, we've talked about it before, they're not just tools to communicate, they're also tools for reading, tools for storing information, tools for instruction. If you have small children, you can download flashcard apps, and your child can review their multiplication tables, their sight words, their alphabet. So now your cell phone is an educational tool. You can take notes with it, record a lecture. So it's a different message because the audience has changed. So the message is the what. So again, what is this speaker, what is this writer trying to convey to me? What's the argument? There should always be a message when rhetoric is involved. I want you to know that messages come in many forms, and I tried to categorize them into two main areas. If a message is informative, it will be descriptive. It could be a story, a narrative. It could be a definition in where terms or concepts are explained and defined. It could be through cause and effect, compare or contrast. The message can even be instructional. On the other hand, the message could be purely persuasive, and where there's an argument or an advertisement, a proposal, maybe an illustration, depiction of something, an editorial. And we talked about in persuasion, there is a strong motive because the author wants you to do something, engage in some type of prescribed behavior. Another area to consider is that your messages come in many genres. And so the message could come through the form of something fiction. It could be a cookbook, which could be instructional, autobiography, narrative, perhaps a news article, sharing of ideas and facts, a review, letter to the editor, or even a persuasive essay. So what genre does your message come in? And remember, the purpose of that message is directly related to the needs of the intended audience. Another area, tone. So we talked about tone answers the question of how is that message being conveyed. This is just a review of the notes that we took way back in series 1. How is that message being presented? You want to ask that question as a reader. How will you present the message? You want to answer that question as you are the writer. Just think about connotation and denotation. Those terms really sum up what we've talked about regarding tone. So is that message more connotative in terms of it being persuasive and shaded and emotional of some type? Or is it more denotative, where it's just neutral, straightforward, and direct? We talked about how tone connects to the word choice. Okay, so I've spent these last few minutes talking about how rhetoric is found through words, speech, language, expression, vocabulary. But there's another form of rhetoric that I want to talk to you about. It's visual rhetoric. And here are some points here for you to think about. So visual rhetoric uses images to create meaning or an argument. So instead of using words, we have pictures. Where can you find visual rhetoric? Well, we have a list here in number 2, advertisements, flyers, pamphlets. How was that pamphlet designed? What's the layout look like? What's the color choice? Rhetoric can be found in a picture from a photographer, perhaps, website design, an application, a map, a form, instructions, art, sculpture, and even architectures. So a designer is just like the writer in that he or she is using images, color choice, form, and sizes to persuade. And if a designer is creating a visual piece of rhetoric, it still has to be appealing and effective. If I had a website and my background was neon orange and hot green, that's not going to be visually or rhetorically effective. That may hurt the viewer's eyes. So I really can't tell you anything if you can't see what's on my website page because the color is off, or maybe the font is too small, or maybe the word choice isn't appropriate. Visual rhetoric is just as powerful as written rhetoric. So I want to show you an example that's close to home and how you can find a rhetorical message in architecture. So have you been here before? If you haven't, this is the Indiana Welcome Center that is right up the street in Hammond, Indiana. It's off of Kennedy Avenue, I believe the south exit. And so the Indiana Welcome Center is like our little museum that highlights Northwest Indiana, Lake County. And if you look at the structure of the building, all of this is strategic, and it highlights the 4 main areas of Lake County. So if you ever get a chance to visit the building, they are open 8 to 5. They have great opportunities for families and children. There's always an art exhibit and just many pamphlets and information on things to do in Indiana. But if you ever visit the actual building, when you first come up, there is a little waterfall and pond type area. And that pays homage to our lake, our beautiful Lake Michigan. So that's one facet that is very famous here in the county. Also, when you begin to look at the plant and shrubbery around the building, you'll notice it's that long type grass, that dunesy type plant life, and that represents our dunes. So if you think about West Beach, the beautiful dunes areas, one of our natural resources. The third facet would be agriculture, specifically corn. So all the way to the right side, the left side of the picture, you have this steeple type figure, which represents a farm. And so in this area, a lot of corn is farmed and sold. And finally, if you look at the structure of the entire building, you see a lot of steel. And this pays homage to our steel industry. So at one point in this county, the steel mills were quite instrumental in bringing revenue to the area. So the creators of this building took all of that into consideration. And so again, the Indiana Welcome Center, it pays homage to the Lake Michigan, the dunes, agriculture, specifically corn, and the industry, the steel industry. And so this building has a rhetorical message that celebrates our natural resources, in which all of these are, and their contribution to our region. These are staples of our region. So that even the buildings that we look at, some of them have rhetorical messages. I give you another example. I don't have a picture of it, but if you've ever seen Iron Man, any of those movies in where Tony Stark is the star, um, the rhetorical message of Iron Man is you have this man who um, was at one point selfish and indulgent, and he tries to save the world to also redeem himself from being so selfish, for indulging, for being greedy. So if you go on to a persuasive class later in your education, you can get more into that. But that's just to show you how even movies, things of entertainment, can have a rhetorical message. Okay, here are some more examples. So I'd like to talk to you about how can you do an analysis on visual rhetoric. It's quite interesting. So what you're looking at are anti-suffrage postcards. And these postcards were created about 100 years ago. Now I'm just going to describe what we're looking at here, and then I'm going to go through a short analysis. So on this first slide, we've got a picture in the upper left-hand corner. It says, what will men wear when women wear, and then we have pants. And then here's another picture here. It says, peace at last. This woman has a, looks like a noose, not a noose, but a, oh, I can't think of the word. One of those mechanisms that are used to control animals around her face. Her lips are padlocked. It's peace when when women are not talking. This third image here has Uncle Sam wearing a dress. Now, mind you, these images were created in the early 1900s. So at that time, men did not wear dresses, only women did. And also at that time, it was considered ungodly for women to even show their ankles. So here, Uncle Sam is completely out of line because his ankles are showing. And this image here has a man who is keeping the children, doing chores, and he has a comment at the bottom. He says that I want to vote, but my wife won't let me. Wow. Take a look at some more images here. Wow, these are really powerful. So in the upper left-hand corner, you have a man being assaulted by a group of women. They're beating him. And you have a similar image at the bottom of the page. The women have attacked the man. One woman says, jump on him. He's only a mere man. At the top of the ad, it says, suffrages on the warpath. So women are fighting, causing war so that they're able to vote. And in the upper left or right-hand corner here, we have a woman who's calling the shots from the bed. The husband is holding the babies. He is not happy. And it shows. Now this last image right here is really powerful. You have what looks like a woman, and a caption at the bottom says, we want the vote. And if you look at this woman carefully, she doesn't even look like a woman. She looks like someone who is maybe half human, not mentally sane. And so the message here is, if women get to vote, they'll be incompetent, not able to make good choices. That's not who you want in office. So in looking at these images, they are quite powerful. So what I'm going to do is go through a quick rhetorical analysis for you. So again, just to highlight, these are the anti-suffrage postcards. And suffrage has to do with voting. And when you look at the postcards, these were like the internet 100 years ago. So postcards were mailed out periodically to people. Notice there are not a lot of words on there, but the images are quite powerful. And postcards were cheap to make. They were accessible. And again, literacy was not very strong back then. So people didn't have to worry about reading a lot. You can figure out what the message is by looking at the images. Who would be the creator of these postcards? American males, perhaps political leaders, cartoonists, and artists. And who was the audience for whom these postcards were created? American male voters who were Caucasian and Protestant. Protestant in terms of Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal. At that time, a lot of people who were Catholic and immigrants were coming to the country, but they at first were not welcome. They were persecuted too. What's the message of these postcards? Women should not vote. It will shift the power structure if they do. So in other words, women need to stay at home, tend to the children, take care of their husbands, leave the politics to the men. That's the message of these postcards. And what's the purpose of these postcards? It's highly persuasive to make men fearful of women in making choices about politics. Again, you have these violent images of men being beat, men looking powerless. They look unhappy because they're at home. This is what will happen if women get the vote. What's the context? So again, these postcards were created about 104 years ago. And just to give you a little context, the traffic light was invented around that time. World War I was about to happen, and it happened between 1904 and 1908. And this was way before the first movie was created, which happened to be in 1915. So remember that whatever happens in the world depends on what the rhetorical message will look like. And just to add a little history in, when you think about the time period, slavery, American slavery had ended in 1865, which was just 39 years before. But fortunately, Congress did post this issue on June 4th in 1919, and women got the vote. It was ratified on August 18th in 1920. So still, even after looking at these postcards, 16 years later, women were able to get the vote. This is a rhetorical analysis of visual images. Okay, how are we doing so far? So we're almost done, but I just really wanted to lay the groundwork of, again, how you can find rhetorical message, how you can explore if something is effective, whether it's through word or through images. So just have 3 more examples here. So and just moving 100 years up back into the 21st century, I have an ad here of Nicki Minaj. And so the context, what is this about? It's about fashion and glamour. Who would be the message? OPI nail polish. And the audience, women who like the OPI brand and Minaj fans. So, for example, if you don't care for nail polish, if that's not your thing, if you don't care for Nicki Minaj, then this ad probably would not get your attention. We know that Nicki Minaj is very expressive and unique in her style. She pushes the limits. And if you know anything about OPI nail polish, they feature different themes every season. And so these hot spring pastel colors are what's being featured for the current season. What's the message? Buy these colors and have a unique experience and look like Nicki Minaj. So if I buy these nail color brands, I can be like her. That's the message. That's a little far-fetched, but again, you'd have to tailor this to the right audience. And notice when you think about advertisements, there's always a motive. The motive here is to buy. We have another example. So this is Heinz ketchup. Not a lot of words here. A lot of red. Ads are very powerful. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So what's the context here? Food. The messenger is Heinz ketchup industry. The audience, chefs, and those who like ketchup. So, ads are not really in depth. They can be very basic, but still quite persuasive. What's the message here? To buy Heinz because it's made with fresh tomatoes. So we live in an age where people love organic things straight from the earth. We don't like processed food. We want to know what's in our food. They want to highlight that as a company. And look at the bottle, or yeah, the ketchup bottle. It really looks like a stack of sliced tomatoes. This is to reiterate how everything in that bottle, everything in that ketchup is fresh and grown from the earth. And Heinz is a long-standing American family-owned business. And notice the caption, "No one grows ketchup like Heinz." What's the motive? Go out and buy Heinz if you want some ketchup. One last ad here. So going back in about 50 years, and this is an ad for Tide clothes detergent. We have a married couple here who are in love. They're happy. The husband's shirt is clean. It's even sparkling. I'll read the caption from the top in red. It says, "He wears the cleanest shirts in town, and his missus swears by Tide." And in this blue area at the bottom, it says, "Tide gets clothes cleaner than any soap." And we have a little image of the Tide clothes detergent. So what is going on here rhetorically? So let's talk about that image that we just saw. And the time frame is really powerful there. But in looking at the context, this is about marriage relationships and household cleaning. The messenger is Tide. The audience is women, especially wives. Notice back in that ad, it said the missus. And the message, it's that good wives make sure that their husband's clothes are clean with this brand only. So if you're buying Cheer or Gain or Arm & Hammer, that is not going to be sufficient. Tide is the only brand that can get your husband's clothes clean. I'm just interpreting the message of the ad. And the second bullet says that women can improve their home life and personal happiness by using Tide. So if families use Tide, it's going to decrease divorce and conflict within the homes. Wives will be happier. They're going to be more fulfilled personally because they're getting their husband's clothes clean by, again, using the specific brand only. That's a little far-fetched. But again, before I even got into this, I wanted to highlight the time frame. So remember, roughly 50, 60 years ago, the rhetorical message of our country was domestication. Women staying at home, tending to their families, tending to their husbands, finding joy in staying at home. It was rare for women to be breadwinners. It was rare for women to pursue higher education. That was just a time frame in which the country was in. And so the ads reflected that. So this is the conclusion of my discussion with you on rhetoric. I am going to recap a lot of these concepts on our next class, but it's really important that you watch this video just to lay the groundwork. Again, we could not afford just a vacation day, a day of where we did nothing academically. So I wanted to lay the foundation with this lecture. So what's going to happen for next class? So in addition to your other homework assignments, I'm asking you to do one additional thing. That is to bring in 2 different advertisements. And you can find them mainly in a newspaper or a magazine. So all I need you to do for the next class is just bring in 2 hard copies of either advertisements from a newspaper or a magazine. And when you begin to look for these advertisements, remember that you should see some type of message there. Remember that advertisements are persuasive, and the company or the writer or the artist wants you to do something, to buy the product, to engage in a prescribed behavior, to change your mind on something. So when you look at that ad, it should prompt you to want to do something. In highlighting point 3, please do not just go to the internet and get random pictures. Okay, there is a difference between random pictures and advertisements. Remember, an advertisement has a message, something that the audience is supposed to do. If you have any questions about the ads that you're going to bring in, I will be in my office. You're welcome to stop by and bring those ads in, or just bring them on Monday for us to discuss. And this is going to lay the groundwork for our next homework assignment. So again, we've actually been doing rhetorical analysis with words and with text, and now we're going to do the same thing with images. So I thank you for your time, and I hope that this lecture laid the foundation for you, and I will see you next class.